Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com and one of our fantastic True Health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 298. Today, we're definitely in for a big treat. We have with us Scott Forsgren, who is a health coach, blogger, podcaster, health writer, and advocate. He's going to tell his story, so I'm not going to talk too much about him because I'm really excited for him to tell us firsthand. But what's really exciting is that he helps people to recover from Lyme disease and get to the bottom of it. And there's so many different things when it comes to Lyme to consider. It's not just, treat the parakeet. It's parakeet. Am I saying that right?
Spirocheet. It's definitely not a parakeat.
It's not a parakeet. I know. It's okay. I can sound like a dork. My listeners will forgive me. It's not a parakeet, but it can be as annoying as one. No, but the Lyme spirochete is something that we think, okay, I've got a Lyme diagnosis and now I got to, kill this thing in me. And the thing is, there's so many other factors to consider. And I keep hearing this actually from a lot of Lyme patients that have recovered from it and a lot of Lyme experts. And I'm so glad to have you here today because a lot of people get misdiagnosed or they have all these symptoms and they don't know they have Lyme. And it takes them a long, long time to finally discover they have Lyme disease. And then once they have it, it's just like another rabbit hole. And the things you're going to bring to the table today are good for anyone, I believe anyone with mystery symptoms to consider, not just Lyme disease patients, but anyone with a bunch of symptoms that haven't been able to get to the bottom of. And so, Scott, I'm really excited to have you here today. It's going to be really interesting to hear your story. I think when we look at the allopathic way of treating Lyme disease, it's so limited. And we need to go the holistic approach. We need to go and see what all these other modalities have for us. And so we're opening up that world today to hear your story.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. I 100% agree with everything you've said so far. I think Lyme definitely can be a very complex and challenging condition for people. And the more broadly that we cast the net, so to speak, in terms of looking at all the potential factors, not just the Lyme organisms themselves, the more broadly we can cast that net, I think the more potential we have to optimize our health and wellness. So just to give you some background, my story started 22 years ago now. I had a tick bite in Northern California in 1996. Didn't really think anything of it at the time. Lyme disease was not something that anyone was really talking about back then. Very little information available. And so I did fine for several months, but around April of 1997, I had what was a flu on steroids. It was a tremendous sickness over the course of several days. I knew it was flu-like, but it didn't seem like any flu I had had in the past. And so those symptoms continued for several more months. And at some times, I wasn't really sure if I would even survive that experience. And there were certainly times back then that would have actually been okay. I had never experienced anything like it. It was very much something that invoked a lot of fear. There was a lot of unknownness to it at the time in terms of what was happening with my body. I had head to toe burning sensations for several years. That was probably the most significant symptom. It felt really like someone had left you out in the sun for several hours and you had a tremendous sunburn, and it was just around the clock. And so that was probably my worst neurological symptom, but I couldn't at that time get up and walk across the room without feeling like that was kind of my energy allotment for the day. I was having issues with my balance. So even sitting up in a chair or even lying flat in bed constantly felt like I was going to roll out of the chair or roll off the bed onto the floor. So if I look now at the list of symptoms of Lyme disease, I at the time certainly had most of them, but it still took 8 years and 45 doctors to even get someone to suggest exploring Lyme disease. So it was a tremendous journey. It has been a tremendous journey. Fortunately, today I'm doing very well, and I'm very, very grateful for that. I do still take very good care of myself. I think one of the lessons that we get from a condition like Lyme is that maybe part of the message is that we need to take better care of ourselves. And so today I'm really blessed to have a very active life and productive life, and doing things that I'm really passionate about. So that's kind of the high level. I can certainly go in if you're interested to some of the other symptoms. Maybe people listening will resonate with some of those as well.
Absolutely. I'm seeing on your website. So your website's betterhealthguy.com. And you also have a podcast. So listeners can check that out. On your website, I'm just seeing right there on the front, it tells a little bit about your story, in that you were told at one point that they thought you had mononucleosis, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, food allergies, leaky gut, parasite infections, MS, heavy metal toxicity, candida. The list goes on and on. How many of those things did you have? All those things, or was it all those things were actually just symptom of Lyme disease?
So I think that there are a number of different things that are essentially labels for a constellation of symptoms and not necessarily terms that describe a root cause. So if we look at something like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, even potentially multiple sclerosis, those really describe more the symptoms that someone may be dealing with, but not necessarily the underlying root cause. And I think in some cases of people, let's say, dealing with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or even MS, there could be a Lyme component to their diagnosis or to their underlying condition. Generally speaking, I think there's many factors that play a role in these complex conditions. Most commonly, chronic infections, toxicity. There's a host of things that we'll get into today that really do apply, as you had said earlier, do apply to many of these different conditions. But kind of looking back more to some of what I was dealing with back 20 plus years ago now, every system of my body was affected. I had vision problems. I had fevers that went on for months and years. I had joint pain and muscle pain, lots of gastrointestinal problems, cognitive issues in terms of brain fog and memory loss, numbness and tingling, tapping sensations. Actually, I had this tapping sensation in my left foot that went on for years. That kind of felt like your foot was on the top of a motor of a car, that you just kind of felt this ongoing tapping sensation, tremors, internal vibrations, muscle twitches, and then, a lot of these conditions can also lead to anxiety and depression and obsessive compulsive behaviors and things of that nature as well. So, I remember even thinking back to, the brain side of things, being someone who at the time was doing very well in my career, and doing a lot of good things, and then being someone who was sitting in the back seat of a car wondering how I was going to get somewhere because I knew that I needed to be in the front seat, but somehow that just wasn't what happened. Or being at work and coming out with 5 different parking garages and wondering not only where was my car in one of the garages, but which garage did I even park in. So, I went from highly functional to really struggling with these conditions. And I would say from 97 to 2005, I had seen about 45 different practitioners. The majority of them had suggested that it was more psychological in nature, that it was all in my head, that I should work with a psychologist or psychiatrist. I did get a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. I did get a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I did have a doctor that suggested exploring multiple sclerosis. And back then, really the only thing I could find was more on chronic fatigue syndrome. And there was not a lot of information about that at the time either. Essentially, what I could find was that some people seem to get past it after a period of about 10 years. And that didn't seem to me to be something I was willing to accept and just kind of wait and see if that was true or not. So I really worked on every aspect of my health that I could think of for the next few years. And I did actually, working with a fantastic medical doctor in Arizona, I did get to a place that I felt like I had my life back. I had a few years where I still had a few things that weren't completely back to normal, but I didn't identify at that point with still having an illness. I thought maybe I just had some food allergies or something. I mean, I was actually doing quite well. And then in 2004, all of the initial symptoms came back over the course of a weekend, the burning sensations, the neurological issues. So it was clear to me at that time that it was not unrelated to the initial condition that I had experienced, and that we just never really knew what that was. So, I can talk a little bit, if you like, about the next steps and how we ultimately got to Lyme disease. But up to that point, 8 years in, I still had not had anyone suggest Lyme disease as even a potential.
45 doctors. It's such a problem that
It
people,
is.
because I think you had great tenacity to see 45 different doctors, and 8 years go by until finally the correct diagnosis occurred. I recently had a woman on the show who was misdiagnosed with cancer and went through 2 years of cancer treatment before they discovered it wasn't cancer.
Oh my gosh.
I
Wow.
know, I know. And so
Wow.
I mean, oftentimes we really need to get a second opinion and a third opinion, but in your case, you needed 45 different opinions.
I know. Yeah, and I've been to, many practitioners since then. I mean, that was still back 13 years ago. I think now, though, there is more awareness of Lyme disease. I don't think it would necessarily take someone quite that same level of tenacity or quite that many doctors to get to someone. I think there are more practitioners now who are at least aware of Lyme. Doesn't mean everyone's going to accept it. Doesn't mean that there aren't those practitioners that aren't familiar with it and still tell someone, no, we don't have Lyme in California or Washington or Texas. I mean, those things all still happen. But if someone suspects that they have Lyme, there definitely are practitioners that they can get to that do know what they're doing in this realm and can definitely help move people forward.
It's silly to think that Lyme is only on the East Coast. A dog could be traveling.
Yet dogs, birds, migratory birds too. I mean, there's big issues with Lyme in Canada. There's big issues with Lyme in Europe. There's issues with Lyme in Australia, even though it's not readily accepted there. So I do think that Lyme is a worldwide problem. However, when someone has Lyme, and we'll get into this as well, when someone has Lyme, there's more than just Lyme disease that we need to look at in order to maximize the potential for our recovery. I think sometimes people get so focused on, if I could just kill the bug, I would be healthy again. And at least in my experience, that strategy has not been successful. I think there's many other things that we have to look at, and we can't always approach these conditions as though it's a battle or a war. And if we could just kill something, we would feel better, because there's generally a lot of other factors that we need to explore as well.
Absolutely. I had Dr. Jay Davidson on the show maybe about 8 months ago, and he talks about that for Lyme, it's so important to do a parasite cleanse and then to take all these supplements that are binders, because as you're killing something like a parasite, it's going to increase heavy metals in the body, and it's going to increase these other sort of chemicals that the dead or the dying parasites give off, and all these other things to consider when someone is because you can't just go in and, like you said, you can't just go in and kill the spirochete when there's all these other co-infections, and the environment of the body
Right.
has been drastically affected. So we need to support the environment of the body. Well, I definitely want to get into that. I know my listeners, especially those with Lyme or those who are suffering with mystery illness, will be interested in learning your actionable steps to take. But
Sure.
first, let's get back to your story. I'm really curious. So 8 years go by, you see the 45 doctors, you finally have the diagnosis of Lyme. Then what do you do?
So interestingly, the 45 doctors, at that point, I still did not have the diagnosis of Lyme, but I started over. I went to the ACAM website, the American College for the Advancement of Medicine. I looked for a new functional medicine doctor, thinking that I wanted someone that was holistic, that would look broadly at all the potential issues. And so I did get a new doctor at that point that referred me to an acupuncturist that worked in an outlet mall next to a Starbucks that was doing computer-based energetic testing. And I had no exposure to energetic testing at that time, other than some muscle testing that I had experienced many years prior to that. Very logical. I was working in the tech industry. And so this idea at first didn't really resonate with me. But this lady, after about 2 hours, she said, you need to tell your doctor to test you for Borrelia, which is the spirochete that we talk about in Lyme disease, Bartonella, Babesia, and Ehrlichia, which are co-infections of Lyme disease. And really, he had suggested that I see her with the goal of looking at what foods might be stressing and then stopping all of those foods. That was the only thought at the time as to what could be causing my varied and wide array of symptoms, was potentially some kind of food reactivity or food allergy. And so she was the one that suggested the Lyme and co-infections. At first, I didn't think that she was even right. I kind of dragged my feet just a little bit. She continued to push me to do some testing with my practitioner, kind of expressed to me that it was something urgent. And so we did a number of different tests over several months, and ultimately everything that she identified, we were able to confirm: Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, and Ehrlichia. So that really kind of piqued my interest in this realm of energetic testing. As I mentioned, it really wasn't something that I understood at that point. And so it ended up over the next several years being the number one tool that I utilized to guide my journey back to wellness. And so I think one of the things that's really important is to keep an open mind. A lot of things that I would not have been open to, 20 years ago when this whole journey started, are the things that I ultimately now have found to be the most beneficial. So I would suggest people should keep an open mind, within reason, of course, in terms of the tools that potentially could help us to recover from something like Lyme disease. And the energetic testing for me has really changed everything at this point. So shortly after that testing was done, shortly after I did get officially diagnosed with Lyme disease, that was when I started learning from Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. He has a system of energetic testing that I've over the years learned and utilized and have benefited from. And so it's now been 12 years since I went to his first conference, January of 2006. I did work with him as a patient for several years as well. And that really was the best decision that I made in terms of my overall health journey. He has become the single influencer or mentor that's helped me to get my health back, and not just from a perspective of take this or take that, but from a perspective of providing a healing framework that encompassed a broad number of different potential issues. And so he's really turned out to be the person that's been my biggest mentor, and bringing the energetic testing piece in and all of the different things that he talks about in his work have really been key in my own recovery.
That's so cool. I love Dr. Klinghardt.
He's amazing.
Isn't he? I mention him all the time because I reference, I've had him on the show, and I went to the Sophia Clinic in Woodinville, which is right down the street from me. And I've seen them there. And I've had the energetic testing, which is just wild. It's totally, it is the coolest. It's really cool. And I went in, I tell my listeners, I'm like the biggest open-minded skeptic. Like, I'm going to keep my mind so open, my brain will fall out, but I'm always going to be skeptical of things. But I'm looking for proof one way or the other. And I was really blown away by his energetic testing. It's like kinesiology on crack. It's all I can say, right?
It really is. It really is. It's called autonomic response testing, or ART, and it is a system of muscle testing. But as you mentioned, I mean, there's definitely a lot more to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for people to realize that there is no perfect system. It's not that we're expecting to do any system of energetic testing and have all of the answers, but I think we're using these systems to uncover information to get us closer to the truth, to understand those things that are stressing the body that may need some support. And then also, out of the wide number of different things that are out there that someone could potentially use, well, let's have a conversation with the body and see, what does that particular person's body potentially seem to have the most interest in, or potentially benefit from the most. So it's a wonderful tool to really try to individualize an approach. And I think that with these kinds of chronic conditions, there is no one protocol that will lead to improvement for everyone. And so if we can use more individualized medical approaches, I think that's really critical. And that's where the energetic testing can be very helpful.
Very cool. So, how many years has it been since you first had that energetic testing done in that strip mall, and to now? How many years have you been on this the
That was
healing journey?
13 years ago now, so
13.
it's been a while. Fortunately, I've been well for several years now, but as I said, there are definitely things that you need to continue to do. I think many of us have some less than optimal detoxification capacity to even end up with a condition like this. I think there's lots of people out there that have these same infections related to Lyme and co-infections and parasites and other things, but they may not manifest symptoms at all. And I do think that one's detoxification capacity plays a significant role in terms of the symptoms that we develop. So I like to think of Lyme as a bucket that becomes full from a number of different things: infections, toxins, emotional traumas, and conflicts. And as that bucket becomes full and starts to overflow, that's when we develop symptoms. So the goal really is to minimize the things that we're putting into that bucket, as well as to find the drains at the bottom of the bucket and open those, so that we're both minimizing what's coming in and we're maximizing what's going out. And particularly from a detoxification perspective, I think that really is a focus of a lot of the treatments that Dr. Klinghardt and other people utilize in order to move people forward with a condition like Lyme disease. So it's been 13 years. I certainly continue to take maintenance antimicrobial herbs and other things. I don't think we fully eradicate every single Lyme organism from the body. But the good news is, I don't think we have to do that in order to have optimal health. If we look at people that have chickenpox as a child, they don't exhibit symptoms of chickenpox throughout their entire life. And yet, when they're 40, 50 years old and they get into a stressful situation, they might develop shingles. Well, that's the same virus that they had from when they were exposed to chickenpox, and it didn't cause them problems throughout their entire life. But if they're not taking good care of themselves, they get into a stressful situation, it can then cause some problems down the road. And so I tend to think of Lyme disease and all that comes with it in that way, that if we go back to eating a diet that's not full of nutrition and has a number of different food allergens, and we get back into a stressful situation and so on, that some of these things do have the potential to need more attention. And so that's kind of the mode that I'm in now, really, is just maintaining the health that I have been able to get back to from dealing with Lyme disease for so many years.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I no longer have type 2 diabetes, but if I started treating my body like crap, I could develop it again. It doesn't mean I'm always a diabetic. It just means, you can, if you stress yourself out and you don't nutrify your body, and you do all the things run your body down into the ground, you are going to create illness. And your weakest point would be the infections that are kind of waiting waiting to come out and express themselves. So in your case, that would be the Lyme infection, but in someone else's case, that might be the chickenpox infection. That makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of I had a doctor on the show talk about polio. She said, and I thought this was really interesting because I always thought that 100% of the population, if they were exposed to polio, would have polio symptoms, would be, in the hospital, unable to move, that kind of thing. She said, people are exposed to polio all the time. And it just surprised me. She goes, over 90% of people you take 100 people, put them in a room, expose all of them to polio. 90 people will not have any symptoms and will have developed an immunity to it without any symptoms. 5 people will have some minor, maybe like maybe a fever, that kind of thing. And there might be just a very small handful of people that would need to be hospitalized and have more severe, what we all consider very typical polio symptoms. And it's all about the terrain of the body, which is getting back to what you said. So when where there's 90 people in that room that can detoxify healthfully, that they're either it's epigenetics, it's their nutrition in their body's good, their stress is low, whatever it is, they're able to detoxify healthfully. Their body can handle the stressor of having to gain an immunity to polio. Whereas there maybe the 5 people that end up in the hospital with typical polio symptoms, like paralysis, had maybe epigenetically had problems detoxifying, or maybe their body was had a heavy burden of toxins to begin with, and so the environment of the body dictated how their body was able to handle that infection. And that's exactly what you're saying with Lyme, is that people can be exposed to Lyme and never have the symptoms, and people can be exposed to Lyme and experience all the symptoms. And it really depends on the terrain of their body at the time of infection.
I 100% agree with what you just said. And I think we could even kind of take this to an extreme. And Dr. Klinghart's talked about the fact that he suspects or believes that probably everyone has been exposed to some Lyme-related organisms at some point during their lifetime. And obviously not everyone has a health condition. So I do think that, there's a lot of factors in terms of those people that develop illness and those that do not. I don't think the microbe is the primary driver of that. And then kind of back to your point on epigenetics versus genetics, I think that's also very critical, and for me kind of freeing and hopeful, because if we look too closely at some of the genetics and we say, oh my goodness, we have an MTHFR issue or we have an HLA-DR issue that predisposes us to a biotoxin illness, if we look at those things and kind of lose hope because we think that something about us is broken, I think that's really the wrong strategy. I think genes do not tell the entire story. I think epigenetics does, though. And so epigenetics is above genes, or the influencers of our genetic expression. So what are the things we can do to change how our genes express? And that's where we get back to things like stress management, nutrition, detoxification, joy in our life. I think that's another challenge. A lot of people going through something like Lyme, it's difficult to find things that still bring us joy. So the epigenetic piece is absolutely critical. And I just, the reason I bring this up is I just think that when people start exploring the genetic piece, which can actually be helpful, it's important to realize that that is not the entire story and that we do have control of our destiny.
I love it. I love you're bringing so much hope, especially to those who are suffering. I'm thinking of a handful of people I know that are suffering right now from mystery symptoms. And this is so timely for them to hear that, there is so much hope. There's so much they can do. And it comes back to those things that we all sort of know are good for us, but we don't do, like going for a walk, deep breathing fresh air, going out and putting your feet in the grass and grounding yourself, drinking lots of clean water, getting really good nutrition, making sure we have quality sleep, laughing, hugging, all these things that are simple. A lot of them are free or very affordable, and they're really good to bring down the stress, really good to lower those stress hormones and help us sleep, which would in turn help us recover. I think a lot of people forget that when we do things that are fun and make us laugh or get better sleep, that bringing down the stress also puts us in the autonomic nervous system's rest and digest response. And so we're optimizing our body's ability to heal and detoxify when we treat ourselves to things like laughing with friends or getting to bed early. Such simple things, such great and simple advice is so impactful And I don't know why we forget to do it.
And it's interesting because what you're referring to is the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. And it is interesting to me over, many years now of exploring Lyme disease. I would say most people that are dealing with Lyme disease are very type A plus personalities, perfectionists, do because we have something to prove to people. And so I think that there is some aspect of certain personalities that are just constantly in that sympathetic dominant mode, where over a period of time we have not been in that rest and digest and repair and restore parasympathetic side of the nervous system. And I think that also is a key piece of recovering, is figuring out how to become more parasympathetic, how to deal with the stress side of things. Because as you pointed out, you really need to be in that more parasympathetic state in order to optimize your healing.
Mm. So going through your journey the last 12, 13 years of healing your body and restoring yourself, what are the most impactful things you did that would help the listeners today?
So maybe we jump in a little bit into kind of the areas that I would suggest people explore, and then I can kind of highlight the things in each one of those that has been helpful. So for me, I would say the key things based on the understanding that I have today, and that could change tomorrow. It's constantly evolving, but the key areas that I think we really need to explore in order to kind of remove those things that lead to dis-ease, and kind of be able to regain our balance or homeostasis. Those areas are looking at and reducing the impact of negative emotions, negative thought patterns, emotional traumas and conflicts, looking at our environment. So are we surrounded by mold and other biotoxin exposures on a daily basis? That's actually one of the most critical from my observation over the last many years, is really looking at that mold piece from a water damaged building, looking at nutrition and gut health. More over the past couple of years, there's been a focus on looking at mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance. I think that's also important for people to explore. Detoxification, which we touched on, improving the terrain through detoxification so that there's an environment that's not as hospitable to these microbes being able to persist there. Looking at things like our exposure to electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation. And again, coming back to the environment, we really need to create an environment around us that is supportive of our healing. Cryptopyroluria is a condition that Dr. Klinghardt talks about quite a bit. So exploring cryptopyroluria, we can talk more about that later if you like. Parasites, which you mentioned from your conversation with Dr. J, I think that is very important. It's also one of the first things that Dr. Klinghardt looks at in his work. I do think then we need to come back to some of these other microbial overgrowths, whether it's Lyme, co-infections, fungal issues like yeast. Viruses can play a big role as well. So there is a place for that in a program, but I just think that's not really the primary focus or the priority, but it is something we do need to explore and support the body in dealing with. I also think that people may need to explore dental contributors. So do they have amalgam fillings? Do they have root canals? Do they have cavitations? That can play a key role. And certainly I never had any root canals, but I did have amalgam fillings that had to be removed. And I did have cavitations, which needed to be addressed with a dental procedure. And then the other piece that I think is really helpful for many people is the idea of limbic system impairment and rewiring the limbic system with different tools like Annie Hopper's DNRS or the Gupta program. There's a number of systems out there that can be very helpful. These weren't systems that I really was aware of when I was kind of going through my own personal recovery until maybe the last couple of years, but I think that they can be very helpful for a number of people. So I know that's a lot of stuff, but those are the key areas that right now, if I were starting over, those are kind of the key areas that I would focus on if I were reliving my journey back to wellness. Those would be kind of the top on my list.
Thank you. Let's go down that list and just quickly. I know we could probably spend a whole episode on each one. So let's just talk a little bit about. So starting with the last one, I'm excited because you've mentioned some things I've never heard of, or at least I don't think I have. Rewire The limbic system. What's that?
So the limbic system is a part of the brain that includes the hypothalamus and the amygdala. And the idea is that we might have had some type of an exposure, maybe living in a moldy environment, maybe some type of trauma, maybe dealing with Lyme disease itself. We may have had something that at one time the body rightfully kind of saw as a tiger, and had a response that maybe at that time was appropriate. But at some later time, once that issue's been addressed, the body can kind of get into this loop or cycle that needs to be rebooted. So the limbic system really is involved in, it's called the feeling and reacting brain. It's involved in determining our level of safety. So it's all about safety in terms of the things that we might encounter, smell, see, hear, and taste. And so you can think of it as the alarm center, the anxiety switch. It does influence the functioning of our immune system, our hormonal system, our endocrine system, the autonomic nervous system, which then is involved in, blood pressure and heart rate, breathing, digesting, all of those things. And so any of these things can trigger this limbic system impairment. Again, things like mold, chemicals or pesticides can do it, bacteria and viruses can do it, and then it can be a mental or emotional trauma as well. And so the thing that the body at one time maybe correctly interpreted as a tiger may not be a tiger anymore. It may actually be a cute little kitten walking outside the window. And yet the body has that same response of, oh my goodness, there's a tiger, which results in a release of all kinds of stress chemicals in the body. And so there are systems that have been developed. The one that I have the most personal knowledge of is called the Dynamic Neural Retraining System, or DNRS. It was created by a Canadian therapist named Annie Hopper. And she, from her own exposure to mold and I believe chemicals, ended up having to leave her home, live on a boat 5 hours away from where her home originally was. And she ended up, based on her background in her therapy work, creating this system to help people deal with rewiring their limbic system. And I would have honestly probably not believed how profound systems like this could be if I haven't seen it now over and over and over with people that I've talked to, clients that I've worked with, people that are maybe reactive to all kinds of chemicals, couldn't be in a swimming pool with their friends because they reacted to chlorine, that now can be in a swimming pool with their friends and not react. People that could not be in a room with someone who had fragrances or perfumes or colognes of any kind, or they would react, that now can stand in front of the perfume counter at the department store and mist these things around them and have no reaction. People that could not go into a Goodwill without reacting and having breathing problems from potentially mold exposures and other things, that now have no reactions to those. People that had significant food reactions, maybe mast cell and histamine mediated, that have really been able to completely shift those things. And I have personally taken the retreat that Annie Hopper teaches around the world several times a year. I think it was a phenomenal tool. But there are other tools like this out there as well. So if DNRS isn't the thing that someone resonates with, there's the amygdala retraining program from Gupta. There's other systems that are emerging as well. But I do think that there is an aspect of rebooting certain systems and responses in the body that becomes important. If the body's dealing with chronic infections and toxicity and things for years and years, at some point that becomes the default state in terms of how the body responds to things. And sometimes we need to say, you know what, no, you've dealt with that. Let's reboot how you're responding to certain things. And it can be really profound.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm really excited. I'm going to look into that. Maybe have Annie on the show
Yeah,
if
that would
she's
be great.
available. Yeah, really interesting. Is it a machine? Is it a software? How does it work?
It's not a machine. I guess the best way to describe it is that it is a series of activities that incorporate mindfulness, incorporate cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming. It's a whole system that Annie's put together where you do very specific activities for a minimum of 1 hour a day for a minimum of 6 months. So there is a commitment that's required. I find that that is challenging for some people. Some people are not willing to explore it because that just seems overwhelming for them. But the people who do explore it, do put in the hour a day for 6 months, I would say that the vast majority of them have very significant improvements in doing that work. So it's something that you can learn either from the DVDs that they make available, or you can go to these retreats. I think initially people can kind of start with the DVDs and really benefit. I know people that have benefited from the DVDs. At the same time, many of them ultimately then decide they want to go to the retreat and kind of get deeper into it. I did not do the DVDs. I had the DVDs. They just never became the priority for me, and ultimately decided that I wanted to just go to the retreat and found it incredibly helpful. So there's a number of different ways people can learn the system, but it really is, it doesn't require any device. You can do it at home. You can do an hour once a day. You can split it up. I was doing 15 minutes 4 times a day. Lots of different ways that you can fit it into your routine. But it's been kind of surprisingly miraculous for many of the people that I've worked with.
It sounds like that would be an excellent system also for people who have high stress as well.
There's so many different conditions that potentially could benefit from this system. They talk about PTSDs, they talk about Lyme disease, mold issues, people that are electromagnetically sensitive, people that react to EMFs and things like that, definitely could benefit from a program like DNRS. So I think it's a fairly long list of people that, people with fibromyalgia, for example. I do think there's an aspect of this work that gets people also into that more parasympathetic state that we were talking about earlier, so that you then could potentially optimize your detoxification, optimize your immune system. So I think the things that happen from it, even though it is not something people necessarily perceive as, oh, I'm, taking a pill that's going to cause a physical reaction in the body. I think that this work can have very broad reaching physical things that happen that are very positive in the body as a result of it.
You had mentioned emotional healing, dealing with past trauma and healing from that and letting it go. Mm-hmm. Do you recommend any specific therapies?
So this area, and I do, I generally bring this up right at the very beginning with people, and when I'm, writing articles and things, because I learned from Dr. Klinghardt early on what he calls the Klinghardt axiom. And so the Klinghardt axiom is essentially that we need to focus on the emotional side of things at the same time as looking at the detox side, at the same time as dealing with the infections. And that if we focus on just one or two of them, that we're not really going to make long-term progress. We really need to focus on all of those things. So that mental, emotional exploration, when I started this whole process, I thought, of course, the most important thing was infections. Okay, detox, I could accept that's important as well. And then I would say, oh, that mental, emotional realm, that's got to be really far down the list for me. And now I see it exactly the opposite. I think the mental emotional work was ultimately the most important for me in my own journey. The detoxification piece second, and then the microbial piece. Yes, it's important, but I don't think that it's the most important. So I really, out of the three, I put that one third at this point. And I think that so much of what we think and feel, the messages that we're playing to ourselves, that impacts our immune system, and we need our immune system to support us when we're dealing with these chronic infections. So it's an ongoing area of exploration. I've certainly done a lot of work in this realm, but it's not over. I think as long as we're still living on this planet, we will have emotional things that we need to deal with. And the other piece that I think is important is, if someone doesn't resonate with maybe having had some emotional trauma or conflict that set the stage for their condition, the process of going through something like Lyme disease, where you often come into contact with people that invalidate your experience. Oh no, you don't have a real condition. It's all in your head. That creates a trauma that we then need to process in some way. So, we talked a little bit earlier about how many people, at least my observation and that of many people that I've spoken to, many people dealing with Lyme, very type A, perfectionists, I think oftentimes not feeling deserving or worthy of wellness. And, that was one of the things that was interesting when I started first doing the muscle testing and learning from Dr. Klinghardt. And I would do some self-testing, and I would say, I'm willing to be well. And I would get, yes, I'm able to be well. I would get, yes, I deserve to be well. And even testing myself, I would get no. And so it took a lot of work to kind of really focus on that. I think there are many systems that can be helpful. Dr. Klinghardt does a lot of work with family constellation therapy, and I've participated in family constellations, both for other people and my own. There's applied psychoneurobiology, which is Dr. Klinghardt's system of incorporating eye movements with colors, with emotions, with affected organs. There's something called EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I think that's a phenomenal system if people can find a good EMDR practitioner. There are systems like Body Talk, Emotion Code. There's the tapping systems like EFT, or Emotional Freedom Technique. So I think any of those can be really helpful. If people are interested in wanting to learn more in this realm, I really like a book from Amy Scher called How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, a total self-healing approach for mind, body, and spirit. She does a lot of work in this realm and just really has been phenomenal, had her own journey with Lyme disease and stem cell therapy and really recovered quite well, but certain things hadn't improved. And so she started her own exploration several years ago now into the mental, emotional factors involved in chronic illnesses, and has fully recovered and helped many, many other people to improve their situation as well.
That was a great list. I love all those people that you mentioned. I've had a few experts on the show talk about some of those, so it was exciting. Great confirmation to hear you mention them as well. I definitely recommend timeline therapy for anyone who wants to release negative emotions from the past. It's an amazing technique for learning from and releasing negative emotions and limiting decisions from the past that we're holding on to. So that's timeline therapy. What's interesting from what you just said is that I recently had a woman on the show who she talks about how she was helping a whole cohort of women get their hormones in balance. And it worked for a lot of the women. And there was a small percentage of women that no matter what they did, they couldn't get results. And so she sat with them and said, okay, I'll keep working with you for free as long as you're willing to keep giving me feedback, because I want to know why is it that you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, but you're not getting any results. And what she uncovered was all these women at their core had a deep shame, that they all felt shame. And, that translates into obviously feeling unworthy or not worthy of health. And so then she said, oh, okay, so you're doing all the physical things. They were doing all the nutrition, taking all the supplements. They were doing everything, but they were not getting the results. And so then they had to, once they addressed and healed that shame, then they started to get the results.
Yeah, I think it definitely underscores how important it is to explore this arena. And I think in any chronic illness, like I said, whether something had already set the stage for the illness or just the process of going through the illness led to emotions and conflicts and traumas and people not being there that you thought would be there to support you and so on, I think we definitely benefit from work in this realm.
And I like that you brought up that a lot of people discredit it or think, oh, well, emotions, that's hooey. We're so physical. If it's a blood test, if it's something we can physically see or test for, then we're more willing to do it. I'm going to take this pill. It's a physical thing, right? But to heal an emotion, it's so intangible, right? And so it's not, you can't sit there and measure it and look at it under a microscope. And so a lot of people just don't think it's important. And it is that mind body connection is so strong that if we have, like you said, if we have those limiting decisions about our ability to heal, about our worth, uh, that can impede our physical healing. So it's really, I love that you brought up that it is one of the most important things, and probably the first thing that we should look to heal our emotions and our limiting decisions, as we're also looking at these other tests and doing these other activities. The next one on my list would be the mold. How do we test for mold, or how do you recommend we test for mold?
So this is an area that I think if someone is not recovering from chronic Lyme disease and they're doing all the right things, they have to explore the mold piece. And so I really urge anyone who's dealing with Lyme, make sure that your environment is safe, both from a mold perspective and an EMF perspective. You want to create a sanctuary for recovery. And so in the realm of mold, and at this point, I would actually say that mold probably was as significant or more significant in my journey than Lyme was. I've had mold illness now 3 separate times, and I think it is a big player. I know other people that have had similar experiences where the focus was initially on Lyme, but when they brought the mold piece in, that's when they really made more significant progress. So the idea with the mold is that about 25% of the population has a genetic predisposition to illness from water damage buildings. So this work comes from Dr. Richie Shoemaker. The genetic area that we're talking about here is the HLA-DR genes. And if you're in that 25% of the population, about 50 to 70% of the buildings in this country would potentially be unsafe for someone's recovery, or potentially be environments that could contribute to their condition. So, I mean, it's not a small issue if you happen to have that genetic predisposition. And so, if someone explores the HLA-DR arena and finds that they have more of a predisposition to mold, then they really can kind of shift their attention to, is there a mold component? You know, some people may not have any predisposition to mold and may have more of a predisposition to Lyme. My observation has been that most people dealing with chronic illnesses have a predisposition to both, and so you generally need to explore, you know, the Lyme side of things and the mold. Similar to Lyme, there are not any perfect tests for mold, and yet I still would say that it's absolutely critical for people to explore. When we are getting exposed on a daily basis to more toxicity, to more poisons in our environment, and these aren't just mold toxins or mycotoxins, but there's actually overgrowths of other microorganisms that happen in these water damaged buildings as well. There's microbial VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. And if we're not exploring this, I think everything else just becomes more of an uphill battle. It becomes much more difficult to really make progress. And so I have certainly seen people that have treated Lyme, addressed their mold issue, and suddenly there's really a whole much less resistance in terms of their healing path. And so they make more progress, even with a less aggressive treatment approach, where before maybe they were really still struggling with a fairly aggressive treatment approach. So I generally recommend so the Mycometrics Environmental Relative Moldiness Index, or ERMI, that's certainly a tool that I found helpful. Many other people find helpful as well. There is no perfect test looking for mold, but it is a test of dust samples that are taken from your environment that can identify the various molds, and it provides an ERMI score. So if it comes back that there's an issue, that's a really good thing. If it comes back that there's not an issue, I wouldn't necessarily stop there, because these tests are not perfect. If you still suspect environmentally that there may be a mold issue, hiring an IEP, or indoor environmental professional, that can really come out and knows how to test the environment. You want this person to be someone who is literate with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS. That's Dr. Shoemaker's work. You don't want someone that's going to come out and just do air sample testing, because it needs to be more extensive than that. But you need to consider your home environment, your work environment, your school environment. Unfortunately, schools can be challenging environments. A lot of them are old mold, and they don't have the finances to necessarily do the things to minimize mold in those environments. And even sometimes people's car can play a role as well. So starting with the home, but any place where you spend time on a regular basis should be suspect until you've really explored it. And then if an issue is identified, you may be able to do some remediation. You may need to move to a new environment. My experience has been that people with an appropriate remediation company can often improve things enough that they don't have to move. But there will be people that are more sensitive, and maybe moving to a new environment is actually a better option for some people. And so that's something that certainly needs to be explored. I think beyond the environmental testing, within the past few years, there are options for testing for mold toxins or mycotoxins in the urine. So I personally find the testing from real-time labs and from Great Plains, the one from Great Plains is called the Mycotox. I found those very helpful. There is still some debate about these tests as they emerge and continue to be developed. Some people would suggest that what you see in the urine could be normal, healthy excretion of mold and mold toxins that we find from foods that potentially have these contaminants. Other people say they don't see that as a significant reason that these tests show positive results. So I do think the urine mycotoxin testing is something that can be very helpful. So rather than exploring the environment around you, you're looking for, is there some indication that I have mold toxins within the body? And so that's also another key piece of information. If you see that there are indications for mycotoxins in the body, then you want to further explore the environment. You might need to explore whether there's the potential for some colonization of fungal organisms that are producing some of these mycotoxins, and do some things in that realm as well. And then I think putting in some type of good air filtration devices in the environment is also very helpful, whether that's IQ Air, Air Oasis, IntelliPure. I mean, there's a lot of options out there that people really like. I don't think those are a solution for a problem. So if you have water damage and you have mold in the environment, I think you generally do need to fix the issue, and then you add in the air filters, or maybe the air filters can kind of help mitigate things to some extent while you're addressing the core issue. But I think those can be very helpful as well. And then once you've looked at the mold piece and you've kind of ruled that out or addressed it, I think you have a very significant roadblock to recovering that's been removed. And so I can't stress enough, based on my own personal experience and many other people that I've spoken with, how important it is to make sure that mold is not contributing to, the impedances or roadblocks to your overall progress. So it can save many years of struggle in recovering from Lyme disease. I wish it was something that I had looked at even earlier. Fortunately, there is a lot of awareness now in this arena, and lots of people that are familiar with, practitioners that do work with chronic infections, but also explore the mold piece as well.
Have you heard of Green Home Solutions?
I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. It's a company that comes in, tests for mold, and then they have a treatment that's non-toxic and that renders the mold inert. So it kills it, but also it breaks it down. So, because I know that even dead mold kind of puts off toxins. And I had a practitioner on the show that swore it was the most amazing thing. She bought a house with her family, and she couldn't live in the house. She had to live for 6 months in a tent in the backyard because the mold was so bad for her health. And then she found Green Home Solutions, and they came in and they did this mist, this spray. And now, and then she could live in the house. And so she recommends it to all her clients. And she told me that she thought I had a mold issue as well when I talked about my symptoms to her, and recommend I look into them. I thought they were very interesting. So I was just curious to know if you'd heard of them.
I haven't. It's definitely something I would be interested in exploring. I know there's some debate about what people call fogging solutions, that some of them may be helpful, some of them maybe not. So I don't know this specific one, but if people are seeing improvements in their health when they're implementing tools like this, then it's certainly something I'd like to learn more about.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll make sure I pass that information along to you. But yeah, so Green Home Solutions was a company. Are there any companies that you do recommend, or is it just more of a local thing that we need to make sure that they
Yeah.
manage it at the level you told us to?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges is often finding a good IEP that is SIRS literate. There is an organization now called ICI, it's ISEAI.org, the International Society for Environmentally Acquired Illness. And this is an organization that's come together fairly recently with doctors that deal with biotoxin illnesses. There's a number of environmental professionals that are part of this organization as well. And so I believe they're starting to make some information available about what resources are available in different parts of the country. So I would probably suggest people go explore there. In the West Coast, California, for example, there's a particular IEP that we use a lot. Unfortunately, finding someone in different parts of the country can be a little challenging, but I would refer people to the ISEAI.org website, and they should also be able to provide some resources for people.
This is fascinating. I really feel like I need to have you back on the show because we can dive into these topics and so much information. Now you have a wonderful podcast. I definitely want to let listeners know that they should check it out. So it's Better Health Guy blogcast, but they can find that on your website, betterhealthguy.com. And the links there would then, they can go to iTunes for it, or Stitcher, or Spotify, or Google Play, or they could just go straight to your website and check it out. And you also have great, show notes and everything. And your website, you have a ton of resources and articles. So talk us through your website. So betterhealthguy.com. When we go there, what should we first pay attention to?
So the website started 2005. Interestingly, it was actually started before I had the Lyme diagnosis, and so it was kind of put out as a way to share, the journey that I was going through at the time. Hopefully, learn some new things from other people, share my experience, and then it was about 3 months after the website launched that Lyme became the focus. I would say probably the most interesting area for people at this point is the podcast. It's where I do most of the work in terms of keeping new content, doing interviews with practitioners, and so on. There's also articles that I've written over the years for the Townsend Letter and other publications that can be very interesting. And then a lot of what's on the blog are notes from different conferences that I've attended over the past 10 plus years. So many of them with Dr. Klinghardt and other practitioners, and going to these events and trying to pull out the information that seems potentially the most helpful to people, and then sharing that on the site as well. So all of those notes are available for people to explore freely as well. And then again, the podcast is where I think right now that I'm kind of the most excited with the things that I'm able to share through the website.
Now, do you take on clients?
I do have some health coaching clients. I will say that my schedule sometimes is a little bit difficult. I do work with some clients in person as well, locally, working with some local practitioners. But I do some coaching over the phone and over Skype as well.
And so they would just go to your website and click the contact me at the top if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah, they could do that, or they can always just email directly. Scott@betterhealthguy.com is my email address.
I really want to have you back because I'd like to dive, instead of just going quickly through the list that you gave us, I'd like to be able to spend more time on each one. So I definitely want to have you back. But the last one, because I have that list that you mentioned. I wrote it all down as you said it,
Right.
and
Sure.
so I definitely want to go through that the next time you're here. But I'd like to finish off by covering one more of those, which is the how to detox. So that's something that I've been exploring. My issue has been heavy metal toxins. At least that's what I think, right? And of course, I've been doing, I do everything all my guests say. So I've been doing parasite cleanses and, everything, right? And so for me, detox has been like, I got a sunlight and sauna. I got a platinum energy system foot bath detox system, both that Dr. Klinghardt used in his clinic for detoxing. I eat tons of chlorella. So every time I learn about something, I apply it. Um, but I'm really curious to hear from you what you think a great system would be, a great protocol would be to support healthy detoxification.
Sure. So the tools that you mentioned are all ones that I'm a fan of as well. So, having an ionic foot bath, having a good sauna, with the caveat being that some people really are not quite ready for sauna, that it can mobilize some toxins internally as well. So you really want to make sure first that you have the emunctories or the routes of elimination open, that you're supporting the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatic system, the extracellular matrix, the gut, the lungs, all of those ways of getting things out of the body. When we use sauna, you do sweat things out, but at the same time, you can mobilize some toxins internally. And so for some people, if they feel better with sauna, I think it's a great tool. But if they do feel worse, it potentially can cause some adrenal stress as well. Not everybody's ready to sweat or able to sweat. So I think it's a good tool, but people need to kind of listen to their body and not force something that maybe they're not quite ready for. So detoxification, from my perspective, is a lifelong focus. It is something that I do every day. And as long as I am still breathing, I continue to focus on those things that help me on a daily basis to detoxify more than I am exposed to. And so I think when we're recovering from a chronic condition like Lyme disease, like mold exposure, detoxification is absolutely critical. And again, I would say that it's more critical than the focus on the microbial piece. Even though we still need to do that, we want to shift the terrain so that the microbes are not as welcome in our internal environment. So microbes really thrive in a more toxic terrain with a dysregulated immune system. And so cleaning up that inner terrain makes us less hospitable to these things, but it also can really support our immune system. Different microbes like Candida or Candida and parasites, they may be present in the body because the body is utilizing them or allowing them to be there in order to concentrate heavy metals, in order to kind of help us detoxify. So not all of these organisms are necessarily bad or things that we need to get rid of. And so detoxification, I would say, first and foremost, we really want to figure out how can we avoid as many toxins as possible. If we don't encounter them, we don't need to detoxify them. So we want to look at our food, our water, our air. Are we getting clean, pure sources of all of those things? What are the personal care products that people are using? What are you putting on? What's in your makeups and shampoos and things of that nature? What cleaning supplies are you using in your home? What cookware is being used? And so just looking at what are the things we come into contact with on a daily basis, making sure that we're minimizing those toxin exposures as much as possible. And then heavy metals, pesticides, chemicals, mycotoxins, which are coming from mold exposure. Those are certainly things that are critical to consider when we look at this detoxification strategy. So what are we going to do from a detox strategy perspective? We also need to think about the fact that there's toxins that can be produced inside of us by some of these microbes as well, and that we produce toxins just from our own metabolism. So in terms of looking at the things that are important for detoxification, you mentioned binders already. I think binders are absolutely a critical part of detoxification. Unfortunately, because binders generally need to be taken a couple hours away from other supplements, medications, food, they're usually the first thing that people kind of let go from their protocol, that they're not able to be as compliant with. And I would argue that they're probably the most important. So binders, then we look at drainage remedies. So things that can help support the elimination process, the organs, the liver, kidney, lymph, and matrix. Trace minerals are also another key part of detoxification. So one of the reasons that we retain heavy metals, for example, is that we are trace mineral deficient, that our food, our soil doesn't have as many trace minerals in it now as it did in the past. So I often find that incorporating some trace minerals can be very helpful. And then once we have this foundation of binders, drainage remedies, and trace minerals in place, Then there may be some need for individual strategies for specific toxins, let's say aluminum or glyphosate or other environmental toxins, where you might get more specific about the approach that you take, but you really want this foundation in place first. And I would say, just to give people an understanding of some of the binders, some of the ones that I really like and have found helpful over the years, there's one called Takasumi Supreme, which is a carbonized bamboo from Supreme Nutrition. That's probably been one that's been the most consistent for me, and have had a number of other people that have had great results with that. Dr. Klinghardt talks about Zeobind from BioPure, as well as Chlorella. Beyond Balance has a product called Tox Ease Bind that's been very helpful. Biobotanical Research has one called GI Detox Plus that's a great tool. There's Ultra Binder from Quicksilver Scientific. So there's a lot of these binder products that are available. And I think people need to work with their practitioners and figure out which one might be best for them. But it's not only a metal, pesticide, chemical type binder for detoxification purposes, but it can also be helpful if we are getting mold exposure. Can we use some of these tools to help get the mold toxins or mycotoxins excreted from the body as well? And then looking at some of the drainage remedies. So these organ support products, there's companies like Pacana, Energetics, Physica Energetics, Des Bio, BioRay. There's a number of companies that really focus on tools for supporting drainage and detoxification. Many times these are homeopathics that really help to support the drainage and excretion of toxins from the body. And then some of the other tools that we've touched on as well. I think colonics can be very helpful. Coffee enemas, definitely probably in my top 3 in terms of things that I found helpful over the years, particularly for pain and inflammation. Many people that use coffee enemas can say that they have been incredibly helpful. There are castor oil packs, sauna we talked about, the foot baths we talked about, even something as simple as oil pulling, or using a healthy oil and kind of swishing it around in the mouth for 10 or 15 minutes and then spitting it out. That can also be a tool that can help to minimize toxins in the body. So I think the binders, the drainage remedies, and some of these other tools that we've talked about really are critical parts of this kind of primary strategy of detoxification in terms of recovering from a long-term chronic health condition.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. Definitely going to have you back, where we get to dive deeper into this and go through complete the list that you've mentioned. But I love that listeners have walked away today with a sense of hope, and also with some great tools that they can begin to apply. And you've really given us a lot of resources that we can start to, at least a direction to dig in this rabbit hole, at least a good and positive direction. Plus, your website is a wealth of resources. So betterhealthguide.com. Highly recommend all the listeners check it out. Check out all the wonderful articles. You have a donate button should we wish to support you as you continue to produce these great resources for us. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really can't wait to have you back. I'm looking forward to it. And is there anything that you would like to say to the listener today to wrap up today's interview?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely amazing. I do want to share a resource. I work with the Limelight Foundation, and so that is an organization that provides treatment grants to children and young adults 25 and under for Lyme disease treatment. So if someone's listening that is in need of a treatment grant or in a position to support the work that Limelight's doing, they can find us at limelightfoundation.org. And I do think that it's critical for people to maintain hope. I think there's so many things that have improved in our understanding of Lyme disease and chronic conditions over the last several years. And I would just wrap up with a quote that I've used in prior conversations, which is that Lyme disease